Welcome to the Mental Health Multiverse.
We're your hosts,
HB
and LB.
We'll be breaking down some of our favorite movies and TV shows as they relate to mental health, self-healing, and overall wellness, while also breaking stigmas, shedding light on misinterpretations, and helping you understand yourself a little better.
If you're also on a healing journey and enjoy pop culture, stick around. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of MHM. Today, I am so excited to talk about Incredibles, which came out almost 20 years ago, which is freaking insane to say. I don't know how I feel about that because watching it when I was younger is so vivid to me. But in addition to like all the feels of nostalgia and fun childhood times, this was HB's first time watching The Incredibles.
I didn't know. I'm am I like the only person who like thinks that they've seen a movie and then when they watch it, they're like, I've never seen this in my life?
I don't know about any movie ever, but definitely Incredibles.
I think I wrote this down in my notes about like our first experiences. I think that Incredibles is just so part of the zeitgeist of like being a nerd. And so I think I've just absorbed it through osmosis of being in the nerd community and existing. I was also very, very late to the Star Wars movies, which when we do a Star Wars season eventually down the line, like I can talk about that and how I knew so much about Star Wars before ever having seen the movies, but obviously experiencing them for myself was a whole different thing. So that's how I felt watching Incredibles. I was like, I know everything about this and I feel like I have seen it. But when I was sitting and watching it, I texted LB and I was like, I don't think I've seen this movie.
And I replied, somehow I'm not surprised, but still shocking.
Yeah, I think what has happened and this will make it make a little more sense is that because I nanny and I sometimes watch movies with the kids or like I'll be cooking while they watch a movie or something like that. I've seen bits and pieces of The Incredibles. And I think that that combined with just like seeing clips on the internet and seeing
Mhm.
memes and seeing just like how, like I said, it's so absorbed into the culture of being a nerd that, especially a nerd who enjoys Disney things, I think that I just thought that I had seen it. I just assumed that I had seen it, especially it came out in 2004. I was 14 in 2004. Like, what was I doing not seeing this movie? It was
Yeah, what the
two
heck were you
years.
doing?
It was 2 years before I started working at the movie theater. So it's like, I'm very confused as to how I missed it, but when I was watching it, I was very much like this is not something I have seen before. But when I was watching the second one, which I didn't finish, so there will be no spoilers for the second movie here because I haven't finished it yet. But when I was watching the second one, I very clearly remembered scenes from that and I was like, "Oh, this is the one that I've seen before." And it, I mean, as separate entities, speaking of, did the second movie came out 14 years after the first one? Is that true?
Yeah, yeah. I wrote
That's
this down in my
wild.
notes as like a little fun fact too, but the director, Brad Bird, kept saying for like years, The Incredibles were not going to get a sequel because he's like, it's so good as is. We don't want to touch it. We just want it to live in its great memory. And then I don't really know what changed. I don't remember what shifted, but yeah, then the second one came out and I know you haven't finished it yet, so I won't say anything, but I think it's pretty good. Yeah,
I
it's
mean, I like it.
lives up.
I'm sitting here, I was watching it on the subway and while I was cooking my dinner, and like I'm sitting here just like laughing out loud at some of the stuff. Like the first one is really funny
Yeah.
too, but I think the second one equally matches the energy of the first one, and they don't seem because I feel like some movies that are made a sequel many, many years later, they do that time jump, but
Yes.
Incredibles makes
Yeah.
it like it's just the next day, which I think, or the same day, which I
Same
think is
day.
really
Yeah.
cool. So like even though it's 14 years apart, it's like just like it was just yesterday. So I did think that was really cool. But yes, so I have seen bits and pieces of the second one. I don't remember or know how it ends, so I am going to finish watching it and yeah, hadn't seen the first one and had no idea. And I
That's
don't know anyone else who has had that
That's
experience
so
before.
fun. No, I think you're right though. I think it's just you've absorbed probably most of it through just being a nerd, being in the community through osmosis. And I think and you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is, if not the first and only, one of the only super, like specifically Disney Pixar superhero movie.
Yeah, except for Big Hero 6, which
Oh
isn't
yeah,
marketed as a superhero movie, but
it's not.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they don't have like powers. They just have suits. They're kind of all like little Iron Men, which is
Yes.
cute and fun. But yeah,
Yes.
these are like legitimate superheroes with superpowers. And I we can get into a whole discussion about like how each character's power relates to kind of a family trope or dynamic. But before we jump into that, since this was your first time watching it, do you want to give a little synopsis and then talk about like the things that kind of stood out to you on this first watch through of The Incredibles in 2024?
I know. I'm so behind. I'm 20 years behind. Who am I? But I
Well, it's just
don't think,
amazing to me that you didn't, not that there's like a big major spoiler, but it is surprising to me that like other than some of the main things about like who the family is, but you were texting me like I don't even know who this red-haired guy is. I don't know, like I was just like what
well,
how?
and it's so great. Like, I know who Syndrome is. I play Villainous. So, like, I know that
Oh
Syndrome
yeah.
is the villain of, like, I know all of these things. It's just like, it's putting the pieces together. And I think I know who Syndrome is because I've always, I told you this when I texted you, but he basically is like the Disney's Heat Miser. He looks exactly
Yes.
like the Heat Miser villain from those claymation movies. But like, it's just like weird putting pieces together and being like, yeah, I just like have not ever actually seen these. So yeah, so the synopsis for anyone who hasn't seen it in a while or is like me and never
Ever.
saw it in 20 years, we will be doing spoilers for the first movie, the one that came out in 2004, I believe. So, you know, if you want to go back and watch it or whatever. But basically, Incredibles is about so I actually didn't know this aspect of Incredibles, which is why I was like, I know I've never seen this movie.
Mm,
It's about what would happen if superheroes had to hide that they are super. And I did not know that. I did not know that going into this movie. And so thank you, world, for not spoiling that for me because I thought it was really cool.
yeah.
And so basically, Mr. Incredible and Elastigirl get married and they start a family. And in this time, superheroes had to go underground because of all of these lawsuits that were coming up about damages and people being saved who didn't want to be saved
Which
and that kind.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. That is such a dark thing to include
Mhm.
in a children, well, like in an animated movie, but like knowing that
Yeah,
children are going to be watching that, like I've watched this movie so many times and it never really struck me until this watch through where I'm like, oh my, that is so dark. Because he's
it
like,
is.
Mr. Incredible's like, I saved your life. And the guy's like, you ruined my death. And I was like, oh my God, wait, what?
Yeah. So dark. And it's funny because, you know, TV shows like the first set of Marvel shows that was on Netflix kind of touched on this. And The
Yeah.
Boys, the TV series and comic series, The Boys also
Yeah.
really touches on this. And I thought that it was interesting. I was like, wow, Incredibles did it first. Who
Yeah,
knew?
they
Who knew
did.
that Incredibles did it first? And so essentially the father, Mr. Incredible, is kind of grappling with he's kind of having this issue with not being able to perform his superhero duties and he can't find ways to fulfill himself outside of being a super. And so he goes out on these little escapades to save people and he often gets caught and his family needs to be relocated every now and again.
Hmm.
And then a random what's the word like a mystery person comes in and says, "Hey, I have a job for you. I'm going to pay you 3 times your annual salary to do this job, and you'll get to use your superhero abilities." And so he flies out to this remote island. He lies to his family and tells them that he's going to a
Yeah.
conference. And he basically starts using his superhero powers to kind of regain control of these robots who have lost control. And it ends up that the person who called him out there is someone who he was kind of mean to. It was like a fan of his who he was a little bit mean to back when superheroes were allowed to be out and about. And it turns out that the person who called him out there is actually the villain. And then Mr. Incredible gets like sucked into to the evil plot and he needs to be saved. So his family comes out and saves him. And that's pretty much it's like a very much a family superhero movie. They get to
Yeah.
start using their powers again, and the kids are like confused. They're like, but we're not supposed to do this. And so I think, well, specifically Violet, I will say Dash is very excited to use his
Yeah.
powers. But I do think it's very much a movie about family and about, what does this mean, grappling with like what is right and
Hmm.
that kind of stuff. And the second movie kind of jumps off of that and is another instance of like, we're going to try to give superheroes another shot. Let's prove that they do actually do good and let's make it legal to be a superhero again. And the movie kind of follows the path of Elastigirl trying to lead that charge. Yeah. So that's a very long-winded
Yeah.
synopsis
Yeah.
of the two movies.
Yeah. No, I like how the first movie's very much like family oriented, a lot of identity, a lot of themes of proving yourself, right? Like Syndrome's whole villain arc is because he's trying to prove to Mr. Incredible that he can be helpful even though he doesn't have superpowers because he like really looks up to Mr. Incredible, wants to be him, even though he doesn't have powers, but he's like, I'm gonna chase this dream, blah, 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 blah. And instead of Mr. Incredible encouraging that, he's like, you can't do this and you're kind of a nuisance and an inconvenience, and that kicks off his whole villain arc. Also, I think it's funny that we are watching this with that theme right after we just talked about and recorded Coco, and we
Yeah.
had a whole thing about when Miguel meets Ernesto de la Cruz and he turns out to be a murderer and a villain, and the shock and grief that Miguel has to kind of also confront. But anyway, and then Mr. Incredible has his own journey of trying to prove himself, especially once he has to hide that he is and was a superhero, and what that means for his role with Helen, his wife specifically, and with his, with his family. And he's constantly reliving the glory days, I guess. And yeah, so I thought those two things really interesting. And then to me, it's interesting that the second movie kind of focuses more on like doing what's right versus what is within the bounds of the law. I think like that's a really good conversation that they have with the kids, and I don't know if that had any influence, like the times being what they are and when the movie came out, if that was one of the reasons why they were like, you know what, it's time for a sequel. Maybe. Oh, I'm so sorry, real quick, we were talking about Syndrome's evil plot, and I would like to just kind of add on to that the evil plot is him like methodically and systematically killing the superheroes by luring them in the same way that he lured Mr. Incredible out there, and killing them with these robots that adapt and learn, which I feel like is also the first instance of like AI or something.
Yeah.
Just kind of terrifying, but we don't have to get into all of that. But anyway, yeah. What else did you not know until this watch through?
Well, I did think it was cool adding on to his evil plot. Not cool. It's cool is the wrong word, but I did think it was fascinating that the reason he was killing off the superheroes and having those robots adapt to them is so that he could send them to Earth to wreak havoc on big cities, and then he would come in and save the day and be the superhero, which
Yeah.
is definitely like very, very, very problematic. It's very like
It's
I,
evil.
I want to say like small dick energy is what I want to say.
Accurate. Yeah. Evil, small dick energy, kind of the same.
I truly really don't judge by that size, but you know what I
It's
mean
an
by the
energy. It's a vibe. It's
yeah.
a it's a mindset.
It's what I scream at cars who have like really loud mufflers and push and wake me up in
Oh
the
my
middle of the night. I'm
god,
like,
me too.
you know what I'm trying to say without actually body shaming anyone. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I mean, like it's just insecurity, right? It's him
Yes.
feeling insecure that he didn't have powers and that he doesn't feel special. And so his way of making himself feel better is by quote unquote, if everyone's special, then no one is, right? And
Yes.
that's a whole other thing to unpack.
It sure is. It sure is. I wrote that in the themes for the movie because I was very much like, it definitely speaks to people who want to be special or like want so badly. And that's something I could relate to like in middle school and high school. I
Hmm.
really I was put into these like gifted and talented programs, and
Mm-hmm.
I was a gifted kid, but I won't say that I wasn't smart, but I wasn't like the smartest. And it was hard to not be the smartest or like not make the best grades and still be in the program
Mm,
because it felt like there was something wrong with me. When he said that line, it kind of reminded me of that moment in my life, which I have kind of let be in the past. It's not something that still affects me to this day,
yeah.
but it did remind me of that and how like when we put people on pedestals, it can make us feel worse about ourselves in a
Oh,
way.
totally. Yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of that kind of also boils down to like external validation. Like this, again, going back to what I said earlier about needing to prove themselves. I think a lot of so much of all of the characters' insecurities boils down to the fact that they want to prove themselves and they need that external validation. They need someone else to tell them like Mr. Incredible, his kind of complex, I guess, is that he wants to be great again, and Syndrome's whole thing is he wants to be special. He wants to be considered and seen as special. And even though they obviously go on very, very different journeys, at the end of the day, kind of the message that Helen or Elastigirl is trying to impart on Bob is that, like, you are great and amazing and wonderful because you are part of our family and we love you, and you don't need the world to tell you that you're
Mhm.
amazing and wonderful and great. Like, why aren't we enough, that kind of a thing. And i I would love to get more of like, I mean, I guess that's kind of what the second movie is kind of more of a focus on Elastic Girl, but also the fact that she doesn't, and this is like a slight spoiler for the second movie, but she never really has that identity crisis. But I also wonder if that's because she wasn't really given the space or opportunity to, because so her trope is that she's like, she's the mom. She has to juggle a bunch of things. She has to be flexible. And so I wonder if she just like, she had a fast track to that level of acceptance that Bob wasn't able to because he was so hung up on the past, which we'll get
Yeah.
into in a second. But we were talking about what it means to be special. And one of the quotes that I really liked was when the entire family gets captured on the remote island and Mr. Incredible is kind of apologizing to his family, and he was like, I was so obsessed with being undervalued that I undervalued all of you.
Mhm.
And that to me just kind of sums up this whole like what it means to be special or gifted, is just that we can get so obsessed with how the world sees and perceives us that we lose sight of like not only what's in front of us and the people who do love and think we're like love us and think we are special, but also like what we think about ourselves. And at the end of the day, I think that matters a little bit more than what other people think about you, because you're stuck with yourself for life. Yeah.
Yeah. The internal monologue is always going. Well, at
Yeah.
least for people who have. I have recently heard that there are people who don't have an internal monologue. And
Which is wild. Or like some people can't visualize things. Like if you say to someone, imagine an elephant, they're like, I can't. And that is wild to me. But
yeah.
anyway.
What I was gonna say though about the Elastigirl stuff is what you brought up is also there. I feel like that's also a little bit of a commentary on like the expectations of women in general,
Mm-hmm.
and also that that like part of the theme of the second movie is like she's finally getting to take up space in her own right, whereas she had always been in Mr. Incredible's shadow, which
Mm-hmm.
also could add to the fact that she never had the spotlight, so she never really
Yeah.
got to take up as much space as he did, so she doesn't have to go back and relive glory days because she never
Right. So
had
when it was
as
taken
much.
away, it wasn't something she missed. Yeah. That's a good
Yeah.
point.
I mean, I'm sure that she cared and was affected, but because like you said, she had to be more flexible in general and adaptable in her everyday life, she was able to adapt to going underground and just simply becoming a mom because of the way that women have to adapt in society just in general.
Yeah. Because like
Yeah.
that's what was expected. And because the it feels like the time and setting of this movie is like maybe 70s 80s or something, maybe even earlier, I'm not sure. He has a rotary phone in his office. It feels like to me there's still that societal or cultural expectation that like the men go to work and the women stay home. It's that, it's very much the 50s housewife vibe with her sometimes. Speaking of the different dynamics and roles, so like we just talked about, Elastigirl is very much like housewife, mom, juggling a bunch of responsibilities, kind of needing to be flexible and responsible. We touched on this a little bit, but Mr. Incredible's superpower is that he's super strong. And I think that kind of reflects the idea that, like, you have to be the man of the house. Like, you got to be the strong one. You're the one that everyone depends on. You're the one holding it all together, kind of. And
The
so
provider.
the
Yeah.
provider, yeah, and toxic masculinity, which we
Hmm.
see definitely when he's doing like the workout montage. And anyway, yeah, so that's how his power reflects a family roller dynamic. And then we have Violet, who is probably my favorite character, just because like the first time I saw the movie, I related to her so much, in that I was also a little shy and insecure, and I had a crush on someone who like didn't see me, and I felt invisible. And that's her superpower, is that she not only can turn invisible, but she also has these really cool force fields. And then there's her little brother Dash, and as his name suggests, he's super fast. He's like the Flash of their family, which I thought was also funny because, you know, young boys are stereotypically seen as like hyperactive and unruly and troublemakers. So I thought that was kind of funny. And then there's Jack Jack. He, to the knowledge of his family, doesn't have powers, but then we come to find out that he does, and he has many of them. So I'm pretty sure Jack Jack is like a nod to the phrase Jack of all trades. But I'm curious,
Hmm.
like, what role you think that is for a baby in the family? Like, what does that represent?
That's a good question. I feel like it represents that both babies are a lot of work, but that they are also a lot of joy. Yeah, I have to digest the question a little because, like, as a nanny, I'm like going through my brain of like, what could it mean that a baby has like all power, like a jack of all trades baby?
Yeah, no, when I was writing out the different tropes and dynamics, I was like, but I don't know. It feels like everyone else can fit into,
You
the
know what
dad
it
role,
is?
mom role.
It can also be that like when you are a child, you haven't developed you're still developing your personality and who you are going to be, and you are very
Hmm.
impressionable. And so it might be a representation of the fact that Jack Jack could be anything because he isn't fully developed into anything yet.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. Because it's like as children grow, they develop their personality, they develop a sense of identity. And as a baby, you don't have or need a sense of identity. You're just trying to survive. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
could be that. I don't really know.
I'll go with that one. I mean, that's the only one that really makes sense, and I can't come up with anything else. So I like that one. So like I mentioned, I related to Violet a lot when I first saw it, of just like feeling, I mean, you're a teenager. Like when you're a teenager, you go through, like, you're finally becoming aware of yourself and how other people perceive you and how you perceive people, and like, not in my case, like, it was overhearing other people talk badly about other people and then doing everything I could to not be like the person being talked badly about.
Mm.
That's like, yeah, that was like a big fear of mine in high school. But currently, in this period of my life, I relate a lot to Mr. Incredible, as far as like sort of having an identity crisis. After he goes underground, the next shot we see of him is working behind a desk at an insurance like claims department. I wouldn't say that I'm like yearning to relive the glory days, but I think I am yearning for a time in my life where I felt fulfilled and like I had a purpose and a direction, even though what I'm telling myself is that that purpose and direction was not actually something that made me feel happy and fulfilled. And I think we've talked about this before, but it does feel a little silly to be almost 29 at this point when we're recording this and not really knowing like what I want to do. You know, like I feel like I'm back in college looking for internships, looking for an entry level job. I don't know. It's just like a really weird feeling. And, but all of that to say, I just relate to Bob feeling unfulfilled and kind of directionless, and then wanting to go back to a time when he felt useful and helpful. Although for me, it's not so much like going back, but just like wanting that feeling again. But there is a there's a quote that I came across one day during a morning card pull, and it said, "Holding on to the past pollutes the present." And it's just so funny that I had that card right before we watched The Incredibles, because so much of this movie is Bob holding so tightly to the past and wanting to relive the past, because and he kind of reminds me of like the people who peaked in high school and are always talking about how like high school is the greatest time of your
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
life. But I lost my train of thought there. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense that you would be relating to him right now with everything that you're going through. And I love that quote from the card pull. It's so accurate. It's
Yeah.
so, I used to hear a saying and it dilutes, like absolutely dilutes what depression and anxiety are. This is like, it's not an accurate quote by any means, but it helped me digest it a little bit. And it was, depression is like a yearning for the past, and anxiety is an anticipation of the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so when I heard that, like I said, it absolutely dilutes it. That is not as, it's not as simple as that
Yeah.
by any means. But it it did help me kind of understand, like, oh, is this why I'm depressed? Like what? And I think that is why the practice of mindfulness helps with both of those things, because it helps you stay a little more in the present. And one thing that I was going to mention on the topic of trying to relive the glory days and all of that is really like, it's important to have things or find things that fulfill you now,
Yeah.
you know? And it might not be your career, it might not be a partner, it might not be whatever it is that you actually want to be fulfilling you, but you have to have something.
Yeah.
There has to be something. And so like for me, like I have a lot of things that fulfill me right now, and I would hope that this podcast is one for you, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there are more reasons than what society tells us to like see as fulfillment as well. And like for me, where I feel stuck and behind is in terms of like having a relationship and having like a stable, even though I have lots of jobs and I love all of them, I don't have like the sort of income that I can save a lot of money and feel very secure financially, you know? And so I feel behind in that way too, of like, wow, will I ever have the financial things that like real grown-ups, I feel like quote unquote
Mm.
real grown-ups have, you know? Like
Yeah. But
like
also, like, what
I
does that even mean? What is a real grown up? You know,
of
like,
course, like I
yeah,
still feel like a child, you know? And so those are the things that I'm like, I love my work, I love what I do, but I make just enough money to survive, and I also have that like feeling of being behind when it comes to like having a partner. So it's like fulfillment can come from all sorts of different places. And for me, I just chose, and it may be an irresponsible decision, so don't take my advice here, everyone, but I just chose like my happiness over financial security, you know?
totally. Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who will tell you not to do
Yeah.
because it does lead sometimes to debt, and it does lead sometimes to, you know, it does lead to some bad decisions, but I'm happy. So, you know,
But I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to you can be happy and prioritize your happiness and still be responsible. I think that's
yes.
like a big bone to that I like that's a big issue I have with these messages that we get on social media about like quit the toxic job. And I totally am in the boat of, yeah, if that job is if it feels soul sucking and you're having panic attacks every day when you sit down to log into work, like I did, yes, you need to get out of there. And there's a way to do that responsibly. And I'll be honest, that's not what I did. So learn from my mistakes. But I agree. I ever since my grandfather passed, a big thing that I have been also focusing on is like prioritizing my happiness, because that's something he kind of imparted on me before he passed. He was like, I don't care how much money you make. I don't care if you're living in a big house. I care that you're happy, even if it does mean having the big house and having a lot of money. But as we know, there are so many people that have all of the things and who worked really hard to check off all those boxes, and now they're unhappy and they don't feel fulfilled. So, and we see that with Bob, right? Like he has a fantastic family and an incredible family, if you will, and an amazing house that it sounds like is government funded because of the perks that they get being underground superheroes and things like that. But he doesn't feel fulfilled, and it's costing him his family basically, because there's a scene when Helen calls him at work and she's really excited because she's unpacked the last box. And it sounds like they've moved 3 times before this, and she's never been able to unpack all of the boxes, because by the time that they move in and Bob does a superhero thing and blows their cover, they have to move again. And he kind of comes close to doing that when he and Lucius, aka Frozone, go out for the night, and they tell their wives that they're going bowling, but they're actually listening to a police scanner and trying to pick up on, things, crimes or situations where they can help. And then Helen finds out and they get into this tiff about it. And he's like, what I'm doing is not bad. I'm not being a bad guy. And she's like, no, but uprooting our family again so you can relive the glory days is a really bad thing. And then Bob says, reliving them is better than pretending they didn't happen. And Helen, I love her response because she says, yes, they happened, but our family is happening now, Bob. And I'm like, and this is why I am such a big fan of animation, and I will tell adults to watch it, because there are gems like this where I feel like years of therapy and hours of scrolling on social media can't quite always capture what that scene did. And like sometimes, like Bob, someone just needs to scream that in your face, that like your life is happening right now. Yes, the things that happened in the past happened, and you can choose how you want that to impact your present, but that's not happening now. And I say that both from like a trauma informed perspective. Sometimes and I say this almost every episode, but sometimes we respond to situations in the present through the lens of the past, because it's like we're triggered or our nervous system is out of whack, or whatever, and it happens, and that's totally fine. But part of healing is recognizing when we are responding to a present situation from a response that we did in the past. And a lot of that just boils down to survival. Kind of on topic, but I feel like that's a side tangent, and I want to stick with one train of thought right now, which I'm very quickly losing.
Glory days.
Yeah. Yeah. Just
Life is happening now.
thank you. All of that to say, it's important to recognize and acknowledge the past and learn from things from the past, but we do ourselves a disservice when we're trying to constantly go back. There is no going back. There's just what we have right now, and how the things that we are doing right now impact our future.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, super long tangent.
No, it's all related to that theme of, wanting to go back. You can't really.
No, no. And yeah, again, a little personal note, but something I'm struggling with is that like my past self was in such a place to where she didn't really set us up for the future, because it was a future she didn't think she was going to see. And that's a whole other thing. But so part of me is like irritated at my past self and being like, ugh, if I could do it all over again, I know what I would change and I know what I would do so that I'm not in this situation now. but it doesn't help me to think about that and doesn't help me to shame my past self because she was going through some shit, guys. She was going through something and she was doing the best that she could. And so to anyone else, maybe feeling the same kind of way of that maybe Bob was feeling too, of like being frustrated about present circumstances because of a thing that happened in the past, like you did and are doing the best you can with the information you have or had at hand. So just be
Mhm.
patient with yourself. And there is a little bit of taking responsibility and accountability for our actions, but also you can do that in a very loving and compassionate way that doesn't shame your past or present self. So I hope that is helpful. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, we can't judge ourselves for our past actions. All we can do is know better, do better, which we also bring up on
Yes.
this podcast pretty
Yeah.
frequently. Yeah.
Exactly. Speaking of them lying to their wives, that's a big theme in this movie, and I don't know how I feel about it.
Yeah, I think something about the way that it happens in the movie is he's justifying his lying, right?
Yeah.
And he thinks that him lying is for the greater good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think that makes it okay, but I do think that he had justification in his mind to do what he did. And I do think that it was selfish. And I do think that he could have gone about it a different way. And what I do like, I both like and don't like this. It's one of those complicated relationships with is when Elastigirl does go to save him, when his wife goes to save him on the island, she tries to sort of say like she tries to be mad at him, and he's like he dismisses her anger and says, "I'm just glad you're alive because she exploded in a rocket, whatever." Or in what
Whatever. We're just gonna sweep that under the rug for later.
yeah, because Syndrome shot a rocket at her and it exploded. Anyway, he was just like, I'm just so glad that you're alive, which like, yes, but also you lied to me. And I think personally, as I was watching it, I was like, man, I don't love how they frame their relationship so that it seems like Elastigirl is always nagging him, which I do think is a very
Um,
2004 thing. Like, I think that
yeah.
was like, I do think things are a little different now, but it does come off sort of like mom is always the female or the feminine energy is always nagging and the masculine energy is always like wrong. Like, oh no, he did something. I did something wrong and now my wife is nagging me about it. So I don't love exactly the execution of it and I don't know how to put into words like how they could have done it differently or
Mhm.
if maybe it was just the way I was viewing it and that's like not actually what was happening. I'm not really sure. But I do think on top of the lying, they were very dismissive of her anger and made it almost seem like she was unjustified in her anger, but he was justified in his lying,
Yeah,
you know.
yes. No, I agree with you because again, things that you only really pick up on as an adult is for a good period of time, she thinks that he's cheating on her. And that is like, especially for again, a Disney movie, a children's movie, like that is another really dark, kind of mature, not kind of. It is a very mature thing to drop in there, but then it's just like, oh, but everyone's alive and happy. And look, we're a family of superheroes. Yay. I mean, granted, like probably wasn't the time or place to really dive into that. And I'd like to think that they did do at some other point. But yeah, I that did rub me a little bit the wrong way this time watching it. I will say not to justify shooting a rocket at a plane full of well people and also with children. I was going to say something along the lines of like I think it helped put things into perspective for Bob. Like yes,
Hmm.
cuz I mean he says it. He's like I'm just happy you guys are alive, but then they get captured again. But he says I was so obsessed with being undervalued or yeah, I was so obsessed with being undervalued that I undervalued all of you. But then he also says something along the lines of like you guys are my greatest adventure. And I almost missed out on that because he was so obsessed with trying to relive an adventure he had already been on. And I don't know if that shift would have happened had that rocket or the plane not blown up. But I still agree with your point. It's a both and. I agree with your point, and all of that needed to happen so that he could have this breakthrough and the shift to realize that the past is the past and his family is the present, and that's what he should be fighting for now.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I will say, I do not love the fat shaming in this movie.
Go
I
off,
know you
sis.
put a little positive spin on it, but I don't know if you read all of my notes, but I do have a positive spin on it myself. So there are so many moments of fat shaming in the movie from other people, but also of the self.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the moment when Edna literally says, "Oh, you've got fat." And then there's the time when Bob is trying to go through some tube and he can't fit because of his gut. There's a lot of moments when he puts on the new suit and it still technically fits, but there's a lot of stuff going on there. And then the moment that surprised me the most was when Elastigirl sees herself in the mirror in her costume for the first time
Mm.
and takes that moment that really reminded me of the moment of Tinkerbell looking in the mirror where she looks at her, she turns around, looks at her butt, looks very disappointed for a moment, and then has to snap back to reality because she hears a noise. And those were all moments that really took me out of the story. I think obviously because this is something I'm very passionate about and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
why are we doing this? Why? And I know that this movie came out 20 years ago and I would like to think that that would not happen. I would like to think that if this movie were being remade, I would say that this movie holds up completely minus those moments to me
Mm-hmm.
and a little bit about the nagging that we just talked about. But I just I just think that those moments really take you out of the moment. And of course, they were meant, especially the fat jokes, quote unquote, were meant as jokes. But I personally do not find that funny anymore. And I think that taking a person's change of body and making a joke out of it is not funny and that it is hurtful to people whose bodies have changed. And that is why we are all so insecure as a society, is because we do take things like this. And
Well,
and
also
we
that this is a movie for children, and even if it's not outrightly said, children can pick up on those subliminal messages. I mean, that's why you and I grew up in an age where the ideal body type was to be a twig, basically, and any amount of curve or fat or something was wrong and bad somehow. And even though, like, people didn't directly say that to us, like, they weren't like, hey, you have muscle or you have fat, that is wrong. We saw it in so many movies, like all of the leading ladies looked a certain way. When we're at the checkout line at the grocery store with our parents, we saw these magazines of celebrities enjoying themselves at the beach, and the tabloids just like ripping them apart because they're showing a little bit of cellulite and a little bit of flab and they don't have a thigh gap and all that bullshit. So yeah.
and when we were growing up, especially the fad diets, it was Special
Oh my
K, it was
god.
Atkins, it was this, it was that. Like
Yeah.
we were so indoctrinated. But I will say, so like even though there's a clear depiction of the body shaming, there's also a clear depiction of like a physical transformation. And as you stated earlier, it is kind of like a toxic masculine, like he's trying to be as strong as possible, he's going as hard as possible.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to he wants to embrace his superhero self again. And I do like that they have him measuring himself rather than stepping on a scale. I will say that because it's not like we're seeing physical numbers, so we don't
Mm-hmm.
have to look at that. And he's kind of just taking measurements, which in my mind is can be it can be a healthier relationship because then you're not basing your worth on your weight. But if you start basing your worth on those numbers as well, then you might need to reevaluate and
Right.
that kind of
Yeah.
stuff too. Because I think the scale can change. I mean, essentially what I want to say about that is that muscle weighs more than fat. So if you are on a physical transformation and the scale doesn't change, it could be because you've gained more muscle mass.
Yeah.
So showing a scale would not have made sense because if he is trying to get stronger, his weight probably didn't change.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, your worth as a person isn't boiled down to a number of any kind, whether it's
Right.
pounds, inches, feet,
Yeah.
grades, GPA, like whatever. Like, your worth isn't valued by these metrics that society might otherwise say. But yeah.
Yeah. I noticed in the montage where he is lying to his family, but he's like going to the conferences, quote unquote, he becomes a better dad while he is lying to his family
Because he feels better about
because,
himself.
yes. And so I do think that there is something to be said about like when you are taking care of yourself and when you are feeling fulfilled, you do become a better person.
Yeah.
But we just have that caveat of the fact that he is lying to the people he loves. So it's not like the greatest example of that, but I do think that it was interesting that they showcased him showing up as a better dad when he was feeling like his superhero self again. And I do think that is something that can be said about, you know, embracing a superhero version of yourself. Like if you want to start or get back to the gym, healthier lifestyle, whatever it is, like if that's your goal, if that's something that fulfills you, it like showing up for yourself in that way can make you a better person for all the other people in your life. But it doesn't have to just be that. I think we just talked about this on the Coco episode. We've talked about it a little bit earlier. Like just doing things that fulfill you and showing up for yourself makes you a better person. It doesn't have to be fitness or eating a certain way. It can be anything that makes you feel good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As long as you're not lying to the people you love.
Yeah, yeah. Again, asterisks on that. Everything you just said reminded me of Legally Blonde when
Yes.
when she's talking about how exercise gives you endorphins and endorphins make you happy and happy people don't kill their husbands. So,
Yeah.
although I will say, as far as his body image goes, I appreciate that he wasn't suddenly like slender
Yeah.
and super super toned and buff, and that reminded me a lot of Thor when
Yeah.
in Endgame, that he is going through a thing and he's not the chiseled Greek god that we all know and love, or I guess he's a Norse god, so anyway, but he's still strong and he's still powerful and he's still capable, and I appreciate that also about Bob. Even though, yes, there is a physical change that we see, it's not drastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I also think what's important to take away from all of this is that the characters had their moments of negative body image. They looked in the mirror and they felt something negative, but in the end, they continued on and they were still very capable and very powerful. And I
Hmm.
think that's also something to take away from it is like, yeah, you might look in the mirror and not exactly love what you see, but again, it doesn't equate to your worth. Like you are still very capable and very powerful, and the body stuff doesn't and it didn't end up mattering in the long run, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And that reminds me of another theme throughout this entire movie is about hiding. And well, on one hand, for Bob, it's lying, but a whole other part of the movie is like hiding who they are, as far as like having powers and being superheroes. And I like your note because I can see it about sometimes needing to hide parts of ourselves away in order to survive. But also, it's kind of twofold in that when you are needing to hide those things, finding the space or opportunities to let your authentic self shine, kind of like what you said about finding things within your life to feel fulfilled. I think it's also important to find spaces, whether it's with your chosen family, it's an online community, it's here in this podcast, of not hiding who you are away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also think like this is shown in the second one a little more than the first one, but by showing up as your authentic self, you enable other people to show up as their authentic self as
Yes.
well.
Yeah.
I do want to create a Geeknasium workout based on The Incredibles because I do think it can be very powerful to feel like you're coming back to yourself when it comes to fitness. Like I
Yeah.
know minus the body image stuff, minus the body checking, minus the toxic masculinity, I do think that fitness can be a really powerful way for you to come back to yourself. And I want to kind of figure out how to tie that training montage in with that feeling and in a Geeknasium workout. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be really fun. As soon as I started the movie, I was thinking that too. I was like, I know this is her first time watching it, so she hasn't done it already, but she should soon and create a workout based on The Incredibles because I think that'd be really fun. Yeah.
Yeah. It's in the
Um,
brain. It's in the
yeah.
works.
Yeah.
Just to shift gears, something I love about The Incredibles is that they are just real people navigating real problems and they just happen to have superpowers, which I love.
Yeah.
I love that they have arguments while brushing their teeth, while doing laundry, while having dinner. Like it's just like they're just people. And I really like the slice of life kind of look into being a superhero that we get because I don't think a lot of superhero movies do that in general. And so I
Yeah,
just
like
think it's
they're always a superhero in every shot and every scene. They always have this like moral dilemma. We don't really ever get to see them be people. And I think that's another reason why sometimes like you talked about at the very beginning of like putting people on pedestals and then when they and I'm thinking specifically about like social media and you know how we see celebrities and the celebrity culture and all of that, how we put people on a pedestal based on a very small fragment of their life that we see. And then when we do see some kind of humanness or mistakes or something, we're like, eh. So yeah,
not even
I
just celebrities, but also influencers or peers that
yeah,
have, like in the cosplay community or in the fitness community for me, like the comparison game is real for this girl. And it's like I consistently have to keep reminding myself that like this is not the full picture. I'm not seeing the super human. And I mean that in terms of like, I'm not seeing the very human portion of their lives. I'm only
yeah,
seeing the curated stuff that they want me to see. Yeah.
yeah. There's that trend going around on Instagram where people are saying like Instagram is fake and, you know, kind of doing that like de-influencing, which again, I have mixed feelings about it. On one hand, I'm like, yay, great. Yes, let's call out the people who over filter, over curate, saturate, you know, their feeds to portray a certain slice of life that they want us to see. But on the other hand, there are people who are showing up authentically, genuinely, and sometimes those things just don't get.
I've
But
thought about
to
doing that trend.
oh yeah, I mean, I have too because I think we both have we both can if we wanted to because the point I was about to make it, when you were talking about comparison is that we all have something to bring to the table. And I think that's something I don't know if Syndrome actually ever learns that. I'm pretty sure he dies in the end. Question mark. It's very
No
unclear.
capes.
No
No
capes.
capes.
No capes. I mean, yeah, it's very clear actually. He did. And I wish that was a lesson he learned was that like you are special. And I don't want to say that in like an everybody gets a participation trophy kind of a way, but like really, genuinely, we all have something that we bring to the table, whether we are aware of it or not. And this is again because of the period of life I'm in right now. I'm really grateful to have friends like you, HB, and other friends in my corner who remind me of the things that I am really good at, and that they kind of admire within me that sometimes it's really hard to see within myself. Um, so yeah, all of that to say, I'm sure that the people you are comparing yourself to might also look at you and be like, wow, I wish I could do blah blah blah. Like maybe for you, HB, it's I wish I had the courage to stand up to my values and not go to a thing because I'm uncomfortable with this person's presence. But you know, yeah, just we all have we all have our gifts and talents. And to your point, again, another theme of, you know, not hiding those things away to make other people happy, or, you know, if we have to survive, that's something different. But just be you through and through. And I love that that's a lesson that Violet learns too, and helps her feel more secure. I think she goes through that whole journey of she sees her mom and brother kind of realize it's time to step up to the plate with their powers, and she decides to also take a stand and use her powers for good, well, to also protect her family. So
Yeah.
because to me that her whole thing reminds me of a healing journey of like learning how to listen to your gut and not overthink. because so when they are in the plane and the rockets are closing in and they're about to explode, and her mom is like screaming at her like, put a force field around this thing, save us, and she's like, I have never done that before, I don't know how. And then they blow up and she feels really bad and guilty. And I really like that Helen apologizes to her, because Violet goes up to her mom and she's like, I'm sorry, I couldn't do it. And she was like, no, 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 I'm sorry, I put too much pressure on you, I asked too much of you too soon, but I know that when you're ready, like you'll know when you're ready, and you will do the thing when it needs to be done. And she does. Like, Dash is about to get shot by grown adult people, which is also freaking crazy, and she just kind of throws a force field around the both of them, and then he's like, oh my god, how are you doing that? And she's like, I have no idea. So I think there's
Yeah.
something to be said too there about not overthinking, listening to your gut. And I think the only other theme or point as far as like a healing journey goes is like we've talked about at length, it's just your life is happening right now, and it kind of does you a disservice to focus too much on the past. Again, there we can't change the past. There's a lot we can learn from and appreciate about what happened and how it maybe got us to where we are now. We can only control what's happening right now. So, yeah.
Yeah. I also love how real Helen is with her kids about the situation. And I think it is
Mm,
like she wants them to survive, but she's not sugarcoating anything. She's like, these men will kill you.
yeah.
And one of my favorite quotes from the movie in general is from that moment where, where Violet goes to apologize and they have that touching moment, but her mom basically says, doubt is a luxury we can't afford anymore, sweetie. You have more power than you realize. And I love
Mm,
that too, because, and that goes back to everything we've been talking about, like comparison and having a seat at the table and, like we doubt ourselves so much. And we have more power than we realize.
yeah.
So,
Yeah. I love that. Speaking of powers, a question for you before we wrap up is which power that's in the movie would you want, but then also like in general, what would be your superpower of choice?
super strength is a power I really want, not just because of She-Hulk, but also because like living in New York, I may have said this before, I don't let me know, but I really just would love to have the power, like if someone on a bike was like coming towards me and didn't obey traffic laws and like almost hit me, I'd love to just be able to like punch them off the bike. You know what I mean? Or like stop a car from making a wrong turn even though I have the right of way. Like those are the kinds of things that I would do if I and it and the thing is that this vision came to me when I was watching Jessica Jones because she does that kind of stuff because
Yeah.
she's living in New York too. And I was like, man, I would love to just be able to punch a cyclist who was about to hit me. That would be so lovely. New Yorkers are very angry. So, and like these bikers, especially the food delivery ones, they obey no traffic laws. Like they're just
Yeah.
like, I'm trying to get this food as fast as I can wherever. So, super strength, not only because I would love to be very strong, specifically to act out moments of aggression, I think would be lovely. And in general, the superpower I would want to have the most, and the little boy I babysit agrees with me. We both said this together is that we would love to be able to appear, like basically teleport or apparate, as they called it in Harry Potter, just like appear any place at any time. Just be able to like snap your fingers and be somewhere new.
Mm, interesting. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Also, he rated this movie 5 out of 5 stars. So
Is that our first 5 out of 5 from little LB? Oh my
it sure
goodness.
is.
I love it. I love it. Yay. I
Yeah. What
agree with
about
you.
you?
I think within the movie, just because I relate to Violet, force fields and turning invisible was really cool. In general, some of my favorite superheroes are Jean Grey, Raven, and I'm blanking on literally every other superhero ever. So I have this thing about like telekinesis and telepathy. So something about like the mind, being able to do things with my brain, moving things with my brain, being able to get into other
Interesting.
people's brains. And maybe that's like, I don't know if I want to like dive super deep into it. It could just be like, that's kind of fun. But if I want to dive like super deep into it, maybe it's because like some people pleasing thing of being able to read other people's minds. I don't know.
Yeah.
Shit.
When you said that, I was like, it makes sense with the whole like mental health stuff. Like, I think there's something
Mm,
there, deeper dive into like into that. I think I would not want to be able to read people's minds. I think at one point I thought that would be good, but I actually don't really want to know what's going on in anyone else's head at any point in time. I think it would
Yeah.
affect me too. It would have too much of like an effect on me.
Yeah. I think now that we've talked about this, I think I would want the telepathy part, or I guess it's not telepathy, the telekinesis. I just want the telekinesis. I want to be able to move things with my brain, like the Force, like the Jedi, but not
Mhm.
have to deal with hearing other people's thoughts or like
Yeah.
the
Or like maybe
mind.
you can like send messages or signs to people mentally, but you don't have to actually like hear them in your head or
It's
something.
funny because Nate and I are in a D&D campaign right now where he's playing as like a bug humanoid character, but he can't speak. But my character has this like mental link with him. So as long as we can both understand a language, even if it's not the same one, we can communicate. So I'm kind of like his translator. Anyway, that's like super beside the point. But I thought it was funny
Cool.
we were talking about telepathy and hearing people's thoughts.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Oh, one more thing. I love that Edna Mode formats the costumes specifically to the superhero ability because that's another thing we don't really see very much. We saw a
Oh
little bit
yeah.
of it in She-Hulk with the like character who creates the superhero outfits in She-Hulk. But like Edna that goes through that series of like this is for the baby because we don't know what power he's going to have yet, and
Yeah.
this is like your suit will stretch along with you, and Dash's suit has like special no friction, like that kind of thing. And I thought, wow, that's like not something that they ever really talk about in superhero stuff either, is like
Mm-mm.
super suits being able to withstand the powers that they are holding.
Yeah, it's not usually the suits, it's like their accessories. Like Captain America's shield is vibranium, right?
Hmm.
Vibranium? Adamantium.
Yes.
Adamantium is Wolverine. Thank you. But yeah, not so much about how your armor essentially is gonna adapt and with you. Adapt and protect you. Yeah.
Hmm.
But yeah, good point. I love Edna. Fun fact, she's voiced by the director of the movie, Brad Bird.
That's such a fun fact. I did not know it.
Yeah. A lot of amazing quotes. This movie is very quotable. I know like one of the beginning scenes is when Dash is in trouble in the principal's office and the teacher like thinks he caught him on camera. And he's like, coincidence? I think not. I used to use that GIF for like everything. And also, you're Elastigirl. My God, pull yourself together. I used to say that yeah, I used to say that all the time. Anyway, I love this movie. I'm so glad you have been able to experience it in its totality. Also, LOL that I just used the word totality because today we're recording on the day of the eclipse and some people got to see the eclipse in its totality. Ha ha ha. Wait, were you able to see most of it? All of it? Oh,
We didn't see it in its totality, but we did get to see a good bit of the of I think it was like not in our direct line
mm,
region. I'm
yeah.
not. I heard people in Central Park did, and then I talked to the mom I babysit for after, and she was like, "That is not true." And I was like, "Okay."
They're lying.
I'm like, the people who posted about it on Twitter were lying.
Yeah, lies. How dare they? But anyway, I will let you go so that you can finish the second movie. Text me with your updates. Maybe we'll do a special patrons only breakdown of that, especially if you don't remember the ending or don't know the ending. Ha 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 ha
I don't think
ha.
I know the ending. I think the bits and pieces that I've seen, I have not seen the ending because like when I see parts that I remember, I like really am like, yes, I have seen this, and I do not remember who Screenslaver is. So
Ha ha ha. Okay, no one spoil it for her. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening, and we will talk to you next time.
yay, bye everybody. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Multiverse podcast and for spending time with us, HB and LB. Special shout out to our musical composer, Little HB.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, feel free to share it with others, post about it on social media, leave a rating and review, or become an exclusive Patreon member to see bonus and additional content.
To stay up to date on all things MHM, you can follow us on Instagram at Heather Bodie and at littlebin_notbroken, or subscribe to our YouTube channel to see our faces and watch some fun bloopers. You can find all of these links in the show notes.
Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.